We begin today the Gemara on Daf Mem Vav, third line from the top of the Yamud, where it says Itmar. The Gemara here is continuing. This is the last halacha on this subject regarding a case where a Ketana married herself off without the father's consent. She's totally in the father's possession. She can't marry herself off. We had before in the Gemara, Machlekes, a discussion about this. What happens? Do we say that if she does this, then the whole thing is worthless? Or Rav and Shmuel said that no, she's going to need a get, and she has to do miyun as well, because maybe the father agreed to this. So here the Gemara continues regarding this case. Itmar, we learned the following halacha. Ketana sheniskatsha shaloi ladas avia. A Ketana that went and got married to someone, she received the Kidushin from someone without the consent of the father. So now, even if we're going to say that we have to be chayshish for this Kidushin, but the question is, could she back out from this? Could the father come along and say clearly, I disagree, and therefore the Kidushin does not take effect? So Amarav, Rav said, Beini ubein avia, both she herself and the father as well, Yechaylan Lakif, can hold back this Kidushin from taking effect. So the pshat in the Gemara, the fact that the father can hold back is simple because she's in the possession of the father. So if the father actually comes forward and makes it clear that he doesn't want the Kidushin, so there's no Kidushin here. The whole reason there would be Kidushin is because we say maybe the father agreed to what she did. He says, listen, if this is what my daughter wants, so then it's good for her, it's good for me, so he agrees. But the moment the father says he doesn't want, there's no Kidushin. Why could she, though, prevent this Kidushin from taking effect? So Taisus here explains the reason is because the only reason we would say that the father is happy for this Kidushin to take effect, even though he didn't say so before, is because the father is thinking to himself, if my daughter wants it, if it's good for her, so then I'm happy with it. But the moment she comes forward and she says that she doesn't want the Kidushin, so then the father is not happy about such a Kidushin either. So then it comes out that it's not as chus for her. If it's not as chus for her, so then what the husband did was Mekadosh without having the father's clear permission beforehand didn't take effect. The only reason when the husband did this, when this man did this with the woman is because, and it does take effect, is because we say that if the father wants it, then even if he didn't say so clearly, but now that his daughter is happy, so then it's a schus for his daughter, and we know that the father is happy if his daughter is happy, so the Kidushin takes effect. But now that his daughter is not happy, so the Kidushin does not take effect. That's what Taisus here explains. In Rashi, it's not clear how Rashi learns this because Rashi says that the daughter can back out from this Kiddushin is only before the father comes and says that he backs out from this. Or before the father wants, that is. She could only back out before the father comes and decides that he wants this Kiddushin. That's what Rashi says. It's a discussion in Mefarshim why that is according to Rashi. Okay, but this Taisus explains clearly the pshat in the Gemara, and Rashi doesn't say clearly here.
Of course, the letter das can mean two things. It could either mean that the father never knew about it, or the father. According to Taisus, the Chayes is a little strike because if the father knew but didn't say anything, so what's the Chayes bein he?
She can back out afterwards and say that she doesn't want, and then because of that, the whole thing is not a schus. So the ratzon of the father.
If the father knows about it, how could she back out?
If the father knows about it, but the father didn't say anything up until this point. That's what we're talking about. Up until this point, the father didn't say a word. She was makabel the Kiddushin, and when she was makabel it, she wanted. But now she wants to back out, and she says no, she doesn't want it. The moment she backs out, so then the fact that the father was quiet, we don't translate that as a chus for her. We translate as something which she's now saying she doesn't want it. So therefore, if she doesn't want it, so the father doesn't want it either. So then there's no Kiddushin. That's what Taisus teaches there. Okay, but Ravasi says, Avia v'loihi. No, only the father can back out. She's in the father's possession. The father's the one that has the rights to say yes or no, and she can't. She has nothing to say about this. Hey, Sviravona Ravasi. So Ravona asks Ravasi on this. The pasuk here says, if the father refuses her to get married to this man. What it's talking about over here is a mafata, someone that came and seduced her into a relationship. The pasuk there says that this man should go he should marry her. Yeah, she won't be able to get married now, or it's going to be difficult for her to get married to anyone else. He should go ahead and marry her. Then the pasuk says, if the father refuses, so then this man doesn't marry her. Instead, he pays a knas, kesef yishkol kamayr apsulis. That's the pasuk. So now, it says a double lashon. Ma'in, yuma'in. What do we learn from this? Ein li'ela avia. I only see that if the father refuses this marriage, so then he doesn't marry her. Hiyatzma minayin. How do I know if the girl herself says, I don't want to marry this man, she could also refuse this marriage? Talmud Laimar, ima'in yema'in. It says a double expression here, and that means mikol makim. Either way, whether the father refuses, whether she refuses, she can back out of this. She doesn't want to be married to this man. So at this point, the Gemara understands what's the pasuk here saying when it says ima'in yema'in. What happened over here is this man that had a relation with her one time before he seduced her into this. He convinced her. It was beratzen. What happened was that first bia was l'shem Kidushin. He did it l'shem Kidushin. And she agreed the first time. Then now afterwards, she wants to back out, or her father wants to back out. And the pasuk is saying either she can back out or the father can back out. So the question is, how could Rav Asi say that only the father can back out? Here we see that both of them can back out. Amalahu Rav. So Rav answered this question and said, don't go here to such a source to ask a question. Basa Ibcha means that this is something that you can just turn around and simply answer. Why? Ravasi can answer to you. The pshat of the pasuk of here is not that the first time he seduced her and there was a bia here, it was l'shem Kiddushin, and now the pasuk is saying that both the father and the daughter could back out. The bia over here was nothing to do with marriage at all. Stam, he had a relation with her, he convinced her, but it has nothing to do with marriage at all. And over here, the pasuk is saying that she or her father can back out, and then if they don't want the Kiddushin, so then he's going to have to pay a knas. That's what the pasuk is speaking about. Says the Gemara, if so, pito shaloi l'shum ishus, if when he convinced her and he had a relation with her and it was nothing to do with marriage, kra boy, we need a pasuk here to say that she or her father can back out from marrying him. Why should they not be able to back out? There was no trace of any marriage here at all. She's not connected to this man in any way. She can walk away and finished. He could walk. The father could decide. She could decide. What's the chiddush over here? The pasuk when it says ma in yemayin that both the father and the daughter can back out from this. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak explains, true, the pasuk is talking not coming to be mechadish that they can back out. Obviously they can back out, but the main chiddush of the pasuk is something else. Loimar, to say shemishalim knas kimafute, that he has to pay a knas if the father or the girl herself back out. He has to pay a knas, which you pay by a case of a mafute when he seduced the girl and then he's not marrying her. In other words, you would have thought to say maybe only if the man himself refuses to marry, then he has to pay a knas. And that's if the father or the daughter say, I'm ready to marry you, and he refuses, then he has to pay a knas. But maybe if the father or the girl himself, they refuse to get married to him, maybe he shouldn't have to pay a knas. He's saying, I'm ready to marry her. So the ikar chiddush of the pasuk is that even though the father or the daughter refuse, you still have to pay a knas. That's the main point here. But the fact that they could refuse, that's obvious. There was no Kidushin here at all.
In the father, the father agreed, but the daughter didn't.
If the father agrees that she should get married, so then she's going to be forced to get married to this man. Huh? Well, yes, she's a katana. If it's a katana, she's going to be forced to marry this man. And the Amos says if it's the other way around, if she wants and the father does not want, so then also, in such a case, she's not going to get married to this man actually, because the father doesn't want. But, and in such a case, the man's going to have to pay the knas. Yeah. Amalei Rav Yosef said, I'll bring you a raya to this pshat. So this that it says in another braisa regarding this case. That he should go and marry her. That's if he agrees, if he wants, if he's ready, if she's ready, so then he should go and marry her. So the braisa says in this, the expression of the pasuk mar yimerena, it's a lashon that's used like you give money for a ksubah and then you marry her. So why is it using this expression? It's making clear that the fact that he already had a relation with her before was not a Kidushin. Now she needs a Kidushin. So says Rav Yosef, that proves the point that we're saying here, that the first time when he had a relation with her had nothing to do with Kidushin. Because if the first time he had a relation with her and he convinced her and it was for Kidushin, why is the pasuk saying now that he needs a new Kidushin? It should just say that he should continue living with her. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye said to Rav Yosef, no, this is not a raya. The fact that the pasuk is saying you need a Kidushin now is not a raya that the first time was not l'shem Kidushin. Tzricha Kidushin l'das avia. You need a Kidushin so that it should be with the father's consent. The first time, we don't know if the father agreed or not. He had a relation with her and he convinced her, but we don't know if the father would be masking to this. The pasuk is saying now we should be mekadosh l'shem Kidushin, that the father agrees, and then we'll know for sure that it's a Kidushin. Therefore, the lashon of this pasuk is not a raya. Sagt der Heilige Mishneh, ha'oimeli isha. A man says to a woman, Hiskachi li b'tmar zu, you should be married to me with this date here. Now this date does not have necessarily a value of a pruta. So he said one time, Hiskachi li with this date. And he says again another statement like this, Hiskachi li b'zu, you should be married to me with another date. So he said this one date, another date, it could be 3, 4, however many. Im yesh ba'achas men shava pruta mekadeshes. If one of these dates has the value of a pruta, then she'll be married to him. Vimlav, but if one itself does not have the value of a pruta, eina mekadeshes. She's not going to be married because we don't combine these different dates together to the value of a shava pruta, because he said separate statements, iskachili with one, iskachili with the other, so it's not one big Kidushin here. However, if he did not say the word iskachi again, if he just said bezu, ubezu, you should be married to me with this date and this one and this one, so then, im yesh shava pruta b'kula mikudeshes, even if one does not have, but all of them together combined to the value of a shava pruta, shall be mikudeshes, because you can over here it's one kedushin with all of them together. V'im lav, if they all together do not still have a shava pruta, then ain't mikudeshes. She's not married. Haisai cheles, if he gives her the date and she eats it up right away. So then, Rishayna, each date she eats up, Eina Mukadeshes, she will not be married to him, the Kidushin doesn't take effect, Achi Yehei, Ba'achas Men Shava Pruta. As only if one of these dates has the value of a Shava Pruta. So this last case of the Mishnah, we'll see right over here soon in the Gemara, what case of the Mishnah it's going on. Okay, so the Gemara, Man Tane, who is the Tane of our Mishnah that says, Hiskachi, that because the husband said, Hiskachi, that you should be married to me with one date, and then he said again Hiskachi for another date, that it makes a break between one and the other, and therefore it's not one long thing, and we can't combine the value of one date and another. Amar Rabbe says, Rab Shimoni. This is Rab Shimon, the Amar, that said, and this we had this before in the Gemara, Rab Shimon said, in a case where a person, you have 5 people that come and demand of him a pekadon. They say to him, we have a pekadon that we gave you that you're safekeeping for us. And he denies to all 5 people. And he swears a shvuas sheker about this. So when a person makes a shvuas sheker, what happens? He's chayiv to bring a carbon for this. So if the person made this shvuas sheker regarding 5 different people, is it considered to be one long shvuas sheker, or is it considered to be separate? So Rab Shimon says it depends if he said the lashon of shvua again in between. If he just said bezu, he's I don't owe you, or now over there it's not bezu. Over there if it says ein lecha, I don't owe you each one, so then it's considered to be one long shvua sheker. But only at sheyoymar shvua lechol echad ve'echad. If he used an expression of shvua for each one separately, then I say that it's a separate shvuas sheker, and therefore you're going to be chayiv 5 times if it's 5 people. So similar over here, if you use the term iskachi again and again, so then each date is separate. If you don't use the term iskachi again and again, so then it's all considered to be one big lashon of a Kidushin, and it combines together. That's the opinion of Rab Shimon. We had this before in the Gemara. The Gemara before brought the other opinions that disagree with this. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. Now going to the last case of the Mishnah, where he gives her these dates, and she eats them. As she gets these dates, she eats them. So bezu, yesh b'kulam shava pruta chulu. So here the Gemara is going to focus on the next case of the Mishnah, which is when she ate them. So over here it said, only if one of them is a shava pruta, will she be mekadeshes. Frag the Gemara, ahai, this last case of the Mishnah, on what case is it going on? Is it going on the Reisha, where he said separately hiskachi, or is it going on the Sefer, where he did not say separately hiskachi, he just said bezu? Ilay ma Reisha, if you'll say this last case where she eats these dates, and over here the Mishnah is saying only if one date is worth a shava pruta, she's mekadeshes. If it's going back to the Reisha of the Mishnah, so then my area yicheles. Why would we say that this halacha, that one has to be worth a shava pruta, and only then is she mekadeshes? Why would this be only if, because she was eating it all? She ate it up already. So therefore, only if one has a shava pruta, then she would be mekadeshes. Afila manachas nami. Even if the dates that he's giving her, she puts it down on the table and it's all here, the halacha still remains the same. Only if one of them has the value of a shava pruta, will she be mekadeshes? Because he said hiskachi for each date separately, so you can't combine the value of one date to another. So this case of the Mishnah of eating cannot go on the Reisha. Again, the ha hiskacheli bezu ka'amar. He clearly said you should be mekadeshes only with one. So one has to be a shava pruta. Elo aseifa. Rather, it's going on the seifa of the Mishnah, where he's telling her, I want you to be mekadeshes to me with all of them. Right? He said it, hiskachili, one time he said hiskachi, and he said bezu, 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 you should be mekadeshes to me, let's say, with all three of them. But if so, the question is, va'afila b'kamaisa? Is the Mishnah saying now that if the first of these dates would be a Shava Pruta, then she should be Mekadeshes? What was the lashon of the Mishnah? The Mishnah said, Achi heba achas mehen Shava Pruta. As long as one date was a Shava Pruta, she'll be Mekadeshes. Says the Gemara, does that mean even if the first date she ate and that one was a Shava Pruta, she'll be Mekadeshes? Like the Gemara, but v'ha milvihi. If you think about this case, it's going to come out that he's being Mekadesher with a loan. How does this become a loan? So Rashi explains, when he was Mekadesher, he told her clearly that the Kidushin is not taking effect with one date, it's taking effect with all of them. Let's say he's giving her 3 dates, he's telling her, bezu, 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 you only Mekadeshes until you get the third date. When you get the third date. And what did she do though? The moment she got the first date, she ate it up. When she ate up that date, at that point though, there was no Kidushin yet. It wasn't even hers. He gave it to her, but the Kidushin didn't take effect. So basically, he's giving it to her to hold on to until he's going to give her the additional dates, and only afterwards will the Kidushin take effect. So now he's holding on to something which is not even really hers yet. It's just holding on to it as a pekadon. And then she goes and she eats it up. The moment she eats it up, so now she really owes him the value of this date until he gives her the other 2 dates that are going to complete the Kidushin. And then when he gives her the other 2 dates, if the other 2 dates do not have a value of a Shava Pruta separately, and it's only the first date that has a value of a Shava Pruta, and the Mishnah here is saying that she's going to be Mikadeshes with the first date, but that first date is gone. It's not here anymore. And all there is in this for this date is the fact that she owes him the value of that date that she ate before the Kidushin was completed. If so, he's being Mekadesher, not with the actual date, which is not here anymore. He's being Mekadesher with the fact that she owes him the money for this date. And now he's saying, going to be Mekadeshes to me with it, meaning he's being Meichel her the value that he owes her for that date. That's Mekadesh b'milveh. So the Gemara says, either way, we don't understand the halacha of this last case in the Mishnah. So on this question, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Harei Shulchan, you have here a table set. V'harei basar, there's meat on the table. V'harei sakin, there's a knife. But ve'ein lanu lechel, we don't know what to do with this. We don't know how to eat this. This is an expression saying we have over here this whole Mishnah, but it seems like everything is prepared. One case, a second case, a third case in the Mishnah, but there's no explanation of what the third case of the Mishnah goes on. So the Gemara brings 2 pshatim for the Mishnah. Rav and Shmuel Amri Tavayu. Rav and Shmuel both say the pshat on the Mishnah is Lo'ila Mareisha. The last case here in the Mishnah, when he gave her a date and she ate it immediately, and then she ate another date. So the Mishnah is saying only if one was a Shava Pruta will she be Mekadeshes. Is going back in the case of the Reisha, where he told her hiskachi, and therefore one has to be a Shava Pruta. So what was our question? If so, why is it saying only if she ate it? And therefore, one has to be a Shava Pruta. Why doesn't it say just if it's all just sitting there on the table? Says the Gemara, V'loi mi boya ka'amar. It's a big chiddush here in this case to say that she would not be Mekadeshes with this one date if it's not a Shava Pruta. Because loi mi boya manachas, needless to say, if he gives her these dates and they're all sitting on the table, that she will not be Mekadeshes. If one of them is not a Shava Pruta, the Shava Pruta in. If as a value of a Shava Pruta, she'll be Mekadeshes, and he loi, and if not. Here in the last case of the Mishnah, when she's now eating this date that he gave her, so in such a case, hoyol umikarva hanayasa, maybe I would say, even if it doesn't have a value of a Shava Pruta, but because we see how much she wants this date, she goes and she eats it right away and she enjoys this date, maybe I would say that she decides that she's ready to be married to him, even with this date that's not a Shava Pruta. For her, this date is very valuable for her. So maybe the Kidushin should take effect right away. Kamash Malan, that's what the Mishnah here is saying. Even though she ate this date, but if it's not a Shava Pruta, she's not Mekadeshes. That's the Chiddush of the last case of the Mishnah, so it is going back to the first case. That's one pshat. That's Rav and Shmuel's pshat. Rav Ami says another pshat. La'olam ha'seifa. Really, this case of the Mishnah is going on, the seifa of the Mishnah, where he told her that you hiskachili bezu, and with all of them together. So our question was, if so, it comes out, if the first one was the one that was worth a Shava Pruta, and that she ate right away, before the Kidushin takes effect at the end. So now, she's only Mekadeshes with what she owes him for the value of this date that she ate. So that's a Kidushin with a milva, with a loan. So he explains you have to learn the Mishnah in a more specific way. Umay ba'achas men shava pruta. When it says in the Mishnah that if one of these dates is worth a pruta shall be mekadeshes, it doesn't mean any one of them. It doesn't mean the first one. It only means ba'achrayno shava pruta. If the last date that he gave her is worth a shava pruta, then she'll be mekadeshes. And that's not a kedusha with a milveh. The previous dates that she ate, so then she eats it, and now she owes him the value of that until the Kedushin actually takes effect later. But the very last date that he's giving her now is when the Kedushin takes effect. So when he gives her that date and she eats it right away, she's Mekadeshes with this date. There's no loan here. Now is when she's becoming Mekadeshes. So even though it said in the Mishnah, Ba'achas mehen, the Ba'achas mehen in the Mishnah meant only the last one.
Why can't you be Mekadesh b'milvah?
So we had before in the Gemara that because we learn out Kesef Kiddushin from Stei Ephraim, so just like over there, when Avram paid for the property, he paid with Kesef Mamish. So too, Kiddushin has to be with Kesef Mamish. You can't be Mekadesh b'milvah. That's what Rashi explained on Davav. So now the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, now based on this answer of Rav Ami here, Shmami no med Rabami tlas. We learn from Rav Ami 3 different halachas. Shmami no, the first thing we can learn from what Rav Ami said, HaMekadesh b'milvah, and HaMekadeshes. Since Rav Ami accepted this question, and he gave this answer that it's only with the last one, so that shows that if it was a loan, if it was the first one, so then it's like a loan, she's not Mekadeshes. Shmami no, another thing we can learn from Rav Ami is, HaMekadesh b'milvah upruta, if you Mekadesh a woman with a loan, you're being meichel a loan that you gave her, but together with that, you're also giving her an actual prute. So daita pruta. We say that she's thinking about the pruta you're giving her, and she will be mekadeshes, because that's really what's happening over here. He's being mekadesher with, let's say, 3 dates. The first 2 dates, if she eats it right away, it becomes like a loan. The Kidushin didn't take effect yet, and she ate it, and she owes him that to give him back these dates, because there's no Kidushin taking effect there. And he's being Mekadesher with those dates as well, because he says, bezu, 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 everything. But then the last one is like a pruta. The last one, if it's worth a shava pruta, that's what he's actually being Mekadesher with. So he's being Mekadesher with a milveh and with a pruta. So you may say that she's focusing, she wants the Kidushin to take effect only with the milveh, and therefore it should not be a Kedushin. But on that we say no, daita pruta, that her mind, she's thinking that the Kedushin will take effect with the pruta, and in this case that's the last date that she's getting, and therefore she'll be Mekadeshes.
It's not the milvah.
Again, which is not the milvah, right? The last date. And the last halacha we see from here is, and here the Gemara actually sort of comes out, the Gemara will now, you'll see that there's a whole nother way how to understand what's going on here. Shmami no, a third halacha you can learn from what Rav Ami said is, Mo'is ba'al mechayzrim. When a woman gets money, and this money turns out to be stam money, because the money does not end up being used for Kiddushin, chayzrim, she has to pay it back to him. Which means, what happens when a woman gets money from a man for Kiddushin, and if for whatever reason the Kiddushin didn't end up taking effect, the Kiddushin was not done right, and the Kiddushin does not take effect. What happens now with this money? So one thing you could say is, well, if so, she owes him the money. She has to give it back to the husband. Another thing you could say is, well, if the Kiddushin didn't take effect, she doesn't owe it to the husband, so then we just treat it as a gift. Wasn't the Kiddushin, but she can keep it as a gift. So what the Gemara here is saying is, the whole premise of what we were asking over here is that when he gave her the first date, the moment she ate it, when she ate it, it was not l'shem Kiddushin, because the Kiddushin only takes effect in the end, because he said bezu, bezu, bezu. So when she ate it, what happens is it turns into a loan. She owes it to him. She has to give it back to him. And now if only the first date is the one that had a shava pruta, our question was that she's being mekadeshes with a milveh, with a loan, with that first date. But if we would say that the moment he gives her the date, whether it's for Kiddushin, whether it's not for Kiddushin, it's a gift for her. She doesn't owe it to give it back to him. It's a matana. Now, when he says bezu or bezu or bezu, so she got it as a gift immediately, and when she eats it as a gift. Elamai, when he completes the Kiddushin and gives her the last date, so now that matana ends up being a matana l'shem Kiddushin. So there's no milveh here b'chlal. So then she should be Mekadeshes. And the whole question about milveh wouldn't begin b'chlal, because then I combine all 3 dates and say that she got it as a matana, and that matana is l'shem Kedushin. Where is there any loan here? The whole concept of loan is only possible if you come with the premise that if she gets something, shaloi l'shem Kedushin, she owes it to him. She has to give it back to him. But if I say that if it's not l'shem Kidushin, she can keep it, so then there's no loan here. Adarab, it's mitzdaref to the Kidushin once the Kidushin completes, when he gives it the very last date. So the fact that Rab Ami over here agreed to this whole question and gave this whole answer means that when you give money to a Isha and it's not for Kiddushin, she owes it to him. She has to give it back to him. It becomes like a loan. So in connection to this, the Gemara now brings a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel regarding this kind of a case, even though it's not exactly the same, but this kind of a concept. Itmer, so we learned a machlokes about this. Hamakadosh achoisei. Person comes and is mekadosh a sister. So over here, obviously, a person's mekadosh a sister, no Kiddushin takes effect. There's an isser of a erve and of kodesh, and so what happens now with the money that he gave her? Rav Omar Mois Chayzrim. So Rav says that the money that you gave goes back to the man. It's obvious that there's no Kiddushin there. Shmuel Omar, Shmuel says no Mois Matana. This money here is a Matana. Okay, the Gemara here is going to explain the svaras of the machlokes. This case is not, we'll see here the svaras, it's not exactly the case, similar to the case before regarding the date, because the svaras the Gemara is going to say here does not exactly apply before, but it's a similar concept. What happens here to the money of the Kidushin where the Kidushin did not take effect? So the Gemara explains now. Rav Amamois Chayzrim, the money goes back to the man because Adam Yideya, a person knows she'en Kidushin Tovsim B'chaysai, that there's no Kiddushin for a sister. V'gama v'nosa l'shem pekadon. He gave this money to his sister to hold for him, and then she'll give it back to him. Frexo says the Gemara, if that's what he gave it to her, so v'leim alon l'shem pekadon. Why didn't he tell his sister, could you please hold this money for me? So the answer is, Savar le'mekabla. He thought his sister won't want to do him this favor, so he says it in a different way. He says, I'm giving you this money for Kiddushin, and then he figures that she'll hold on to the money for him. But really he gave it to her just as a pekadon. She should understand that there's no Kiddushin there and that she eventually has to give it back to him. That was his intention. Shmuel Savar, however, Shmuel says, no, Mois Matana. The money that he gave his sister here is a gift. Adam Yideya, Shein Kiddushin Tovsim B'chaysei. A man knows that there's no Kiddushin for his sister. V'gam of an Matana. So he gave her the money as a gift. Why doesn't he tell her clearly, I'm giving you here this money for a gift? Sava ksifala milsa. She'll be embarrassed that she has to receive support and a gift from her brother. She wouldn't want to take a favor. So therefore he tells her with this lashon mukadeshly, and she accepts it. But really then she comes to realize right away that this is really just a gift. That's the machlokes here. So here the Gemara is going to ask on Shmuel's opinion. Shmuel says when you give something and it's clear that what you gave, you didn't intend to give it for what you said you're giving it for, so then you really mean to give it just as a gift. So here this brings us into a whole discussion here regarding challah and truma, a similar situation where a person separates challah and it's clear that the challah does not take effect. What happens with this? Does this become a gift for the kohen? Most of Ravina, so Ravina asks, Hamafresh chalose kemach. Person separates challah from flour. A challah, the mitzvah of challah is only when it's a dough. Reisha sarisei seichem. But he took the challah from flour. Ein a challah. So this is not challah at all. And not only that, v'gezel biyad kohen. The kohen that's holding on to this challah, so he's stealing. It's not his. So this is a question on Shmuel. Va'amai gezel biyad kohen. Why is this in the hands of the kohen gzela? Name, shouldn't we say, like Shmuel said before regarding Kiddushin, Adam Yideya, a person knows, she'ei mafrishon challah kemach, that you don't separate challah when it's flour. Everybody knows this. The mitzvah of challah is only when it's a dough. So therefore, if this man gives this flour for the kohen, v'nasan l'shem matana, he gave it to the kohen as a gift. He didn't want the kohen to be embarrassed to receive a gift of this flour, and he gave it to him as a gift. So why can't the kohen keep the flour, and then this Yisrael will have to separate from his dough a second time challah? And says the Gemara, Shani Hasam over there, it's different. We can't allow the kohen to keep this flour because the nafik chorva mina. Because then this could cause a very big problem for the kohen himself. Now here, the Gemara, the basis of the Gemara is going to say over here is the mitzvah of separating challah applies not only when Yisrael makes his dough, but a kohen himself that makes the dough also has to separate challah from this. So now, if so, what could happen? Zimnin de istei lekohen pachis mechamish revaim kemach. Sometimes it could be a kohen himself is making a dough, and the amount of flour that he's using for the dough is less than the shear of a dough that would be chayiv in the mitzvah of challah. What's that shear of flour? 5/4 of a log of flour. Rashi here has a big arichis how we come to this calculation of punkt this shear. We once learned this in the Gemara in Erevin Daf Pei Gimel, where the Gemara goes through the whole entire cheshbon. It's based on the pasuk by the Mon, where it says that there was a omer that every person got. So this shear is the same shear as the omer. That's the shear of the dough of challah. Actually goes through the whole cheshbon barichas here. So what happens if this kohen has less than that amount for his dough? And v'hai olishle b'hadi adodi. And now the kohen takes this flour that the Yisrael gave him, which he thinks is challah, and he kneads it together with his dough, the kasava, and the kohen thinks to himself, niskana yisasai, that his dough is okay, his dough is fine. I don't have to separate any challah from my dough. Why not? Because my dough is too small. This doesn't have the shear to be chayav and challah. I added the challah from this Yisrael that I got, but that's not a dough. That's challah itself, because that's challah, so it doesn't complete the shear to be chayav and challah. And then what happens? He's going to come to eat this dough without separating challah again, and really it's tevel. It has the mitzvah of challah in it that you have to separate. So therefore, we say that the kohen cannot keep this. We don't want him to make this mistake to combine it. But why do you have such a concern? Why would anyone make such a mistake? Didn't you say Adam Yideya? Everyone knows that you can't separate challah when it's flour. So the kohen should know that this flour that he got from the Yisrael is not challah. It's just a gift. He'll realize afterwards that it's just a gift. And so the Gemara, people can know this halacha, that usually a kohen knows that he doesn't get challah as flour, but he won't necessarily realize why that is. Yedeya ve'ena yedeya. He knows, but he may not know what the reason really is. Yedeya shem afrishan challah kemach. He knows that you don't separate challah as flour. But ve'ena yedeya, but he doesn't know what the reason is. The Savar, he might think, he'll make a mistake and think, Tamayu, that the reason, what's the reason for this? Mishum tircha the kayin. Because the Torah doesn't want the kayin to have to be matriach to knead his own dough. So therefore the Torah said, the Yisrael should give the challah to the kayin after it's already a dough. So it makes it easier for the kayin. And therefore the kayin thinks to himself, tircha the kayin, achilte. That tircha that the Torah didn't want me to work hard, I'm meichel it, and therefore I accept the flour as a challah, and therefore there is a mitzvah of challah here. So he still may make a mistake to think that this challah that he has will not combine to his dough to be chayiv and challah. And really it is chayiv and challah. Fragt the Gemara, but why wouldn't we say v'tehevi truma? Why wouldn't we say that this should be truma? Why shouldn't we be misakin something else? Let's be misakin like this. To let the kohen keep this challah. And it could be, let's consider it to be like truma or like challah, that he can keep it. And we're going to say that he has to be moitzi challah mimakom acher. We're going to tell the kohen that he has to separate challah from somewhere else. When he combines it to his dough, he has to separate challah again. Why can't that be the takana? Instead of making a takana that we tell the kohen that if you get the challah when it's still flour, you have to give it back to the Yisrael. Instead, let's make a takana that will let the kohen know that he has to separate challah again. When he combines it to a dough, that he has to separate again the challah. Mi loitanan, didn't we learn in a Mishnah in a similar case where that is a takana? The Mishnah says in a case where a person took min hanokov al she'ein nokov. This is regarding truma, so you only chayiv in truma from something that grows from the ground in Eretz Yisrael. So if something is growing in a flower pot, only if it's a perforated flower pot and it gets nourishment from the ground in Eretz Yisrael, is it chayiv and challah. So if you took challah from, or not challah, sorry, we're talking about truma now. If you separated truma from what grows in a nokov, in a flower pot that has a hole, so that's something which is chayiv in truma, and he took truma al she'ein nokov, on something else that's growing in a flower pot that has no hole in it. So what is this? It's not truma at all, because he's separating it for something else. It's not even chayiv in truma. So the Mishnah says truma, that this will be considered to be truma. But you're going to have to separate the truma and meiser from this, from what you have, this produce that you have over here, that you think it's truma and it's really not truma. You're going to have to separate truma again. Rashi says the term mimakem acher is lav dafke. You have to separate from this very produce itself, again truma, because this produce that the kohen just received, and he thinks it's truma, but really it's not truma. Right? This is produce that grew in a flower pot that has a hole in it, and it itself grew from Eretz Yisrael. You think that it's truma because you separated it for something else, but really you separated it for something else. It's not even chayiv and truma. So what is this? This is basically produce which is tevel. Nothing was separated from it yet. So now you have to separate the truma again. So what does it say here in this Mishnah? that we treat it as truma, even though it's not truma, but we still treat it as truma. Elamai, we say to the kohen, you can keep it as truma, but you have to separate truma again from it. So why shouldn't we say the same thing regarding this challah that the kohen got as flour? When he got it as flour, it's really not challah. But let him keep it as challah, and then he just has to separate challah again from it if he combines it to his dough. Similar to what we're saying here, that he keeps it as truma, and he just has to separate truma again. So the Gemara answers, but today,
Can't always have to take challah, right? Even
yeah, correct. Yeah, but over here,
true.
true. Yeah. But over here, only if he combines it to another dough and it's going to have a shear, it's going to be chayiv and challah, then we'll have to separate again. Says the Gemara, we can't rely on a kohen doing this. Why? Betray money. So if it's from two different vessels, so then the kohen will listen. The kohen will understand and see the difference, because you took the truma from one keli that's nokov on another keli that's not nokov, so the kohen will realize and see that this is really not truma, because over here this is growing from the ground, this does not have a hole, it does not grow from the ground. So when you tell the kohen that he has to give truma again, he'll give truma again, he'll listen. B'chat moneh lo yitzois. However, when it comes over here to this challah, which is all in one challah that's coming from this flour, that is all from one pot, it's all from one place. So over here, you're going to tell the kohen that he has to give challah again, he's not going to listen necessarily. So we can't rely on the kohen to give a challah a second time from this. So therefore, instead, what Chachamim said is, this challah, the kohen has to give back. He can't keep it. We don't want him to combine it to another dough, and then he's going to end up using it and not give proper challah from it. That's one shot. Okay, so according to all this, the point the Gemara is saying is the halacha that Shmuel said could be true, that really once you give it, it should be a gift for the kohen. The only reason it's not a gift is because we're concerned that the kohen himself will use it together with another dough, and he won't realize that he has to separate challah again. We can't rely on the kohen to separate the challah again. Or the Gemara now says another answer, that the concern is not that the kohen won't know what to do with it. The concern is with the balabas, with the person that separated the challah in the first place. The concern is about him. If you want, I'll answer you differently. As far as the kohen is concerned, the kohen that got this challah, we're not concerned that he's not going to separate challah another time from this flour if he combines it to a dough. The kohen knows. Here Rashi says the reason why the Gemara is saying another pshat is because we know kohenim zrizamein, kohenim know the halachas, and b'chlal challah you only give to a kohen that's a chaver, a kohen that knows the halachas. We're not concerned that the kohen is not going to give the challah again. But rather, the problem is the balabas that separated challah from flour before he made it into a dough. We're concerned that the balabas himself might now think that this flour here is already taken care of, and now he can use this flour and make a dough out of it, and he doesn't have to give challah again. That's the problem. We tell the kohen to give the flour back to this balabas, so he should realize that what he did is not a mitzvah of challah. And then he might come and use his flour that he has here. He's going to make a dough out of it, and he's not going to separate challah again. And it's tevel, because when he gave the first time when it's flour, it's not really challah yet. So like this, the Gemara goes through a similar discussion to what I had before. But didn't you say that a person knows that when you separate flour, challah from flour, it's not really challah at all? So if he knows this, so he's just doing this to give it as a gift to the kohen, and he knows he's going to have to give challah again. So the Gemara gives the same answer as before. Yedeya ve'eni yedeya. He knows this halacha that he doesn't usually separate challah from flour, but he doesn't know why. Yedeya shemafrishon challah kemach. He knows that you don't separate usually from flour. But ve'eni yedeya, but he doesn't know the reason. The savar, he thinks, time amai, why don't you usually give challah from flour? Mishum tercha de kayin. So the kayin shouldn't have to work to make his dough. But over here, the kohen accepted this flour, so if the kohen accepted it, he would think that the challah is challah. But even nevertheless, v'tehevi trume, why wouldn't we say that the challah that the Yisrael gave from his dough, so let it be challah? It wasn't from a dough. Sorry, again, he gave challah from the flour, right? So let it have the halacha of challah. Let the kohen keep it. And v'yachzer v'yitraim, and let's tell him that he has to give challah again. That's it. And once he'll know he has to give challah again, so he'll know that the first time he gave the challah, the challah did not take effect. And here the Gemara brings again, Mi loitnan, did we not learn in a Mishnah? This is the same Mishnah as before, but here it's another case, where over there it says, Mishe'ene nokov, ala nokov. Again, you have two flower pots. One is with holes in it, and it's chayiv in truma, and one is without holes, and it's not chayiv in truma. So what's if the person took from the produce that's growing in the flower pot without holes, and he used that as a truma for what's growing in the flower pot with holes, and is chayiv in truma? So really, what's growing in the pot without holes cannot be truma. It's not connected b'chlal to Eretz Yisrael, and he wants to designate that as truma. So the Mishnah there says truma. We'll say that it is truma. The kohen keeps it, and v'yachsa v'yitraim. But the Yisrael has to give truma again, because since he separated truma the first time from what's in the flower pot that has no holes in it, so therefore it cannot become truma. So really it wasn't truma, but nevertheless the kohen keeps it as truma. And you have to give again. So the question is, we should say the same thing over here. When the Yisrael gave challah from flour, really it's not challah. So why don't we say, let the kohen keep it as challah? And then you will tell the Yisrael, this balabas, that he has to give challah a second time. So why can't the kohen keep this challah that he gave him the first time just as a gift? I mean, Shmuel said before, when you give it and it's not challah or it's not truma, you should be able to keep it as a gift. Answers the Gemara, but didn't we say before, betrei money tzois, when you tell a person regarding truma that he gave, and he separated truma of what grows in one keli on what grows in another keli, and you come and you explain to him that this has a hole in it, this does not have a hole in it, so with that he'll listen, he'll give the truma again, but b'chad man aloy tzois. But over here, if it's from the very same flour, in the same pot, in one pot, and you tell him that he has to give challah second time from this challah, he's not going to listen. From this dough, he's not going to listen. Is that true? When you tell a person that he has to give a second time, even if it's in the same pot, he's not going to listen to give a second time? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah? Hatayrim kishus. A person that gives truma, he wants to give truma from kishus, which is some kind of vegetables, I guess, something. And it turns out that the truma that he gave wasn't a good truma. Why not? Because the truma that he separated, it was spoiled, it was sour. Avatiach, or he wants to give truma from a watermelon. And it turns out that it was spoiled, and there was so he didn't give a proper truma. So what does the Mishnah there say? Truma. So this is a truma, and you should give truma a second time. So what do I see over here? When a person gives a truma, and the truma did not take effect the first time, we don't say give back the truma, and then he'll know that he has to give a second time. We say let the kohen keep the first truma, and he just has to give a second time. So we should say the same thing over here regarding challah. Let the kohen keep the challah from the flour, even though it's not really challah. Let him keep that challah the first time, and even though it didn't take effect, now he'll have to give a second time. So this all goes back again as a question on what Shmuel said. Why Shmuel said that once you give it, it becomes a matana. If it becomes a matana, even though it was not challah, it becomes a matana, so let the kohen keep this challah, and you'll give a second time. You said he won't listen to give a second time. Here we see clearly in a Mishnah that he will listen to give a second time. Answers the Gemara, no, that case, that Mishnah you just brought is totally different. Shani Hosam the Raisa Truma Ma'aliyah. There, the reason why we say that the kohen keeps the Truma is because it actually is Truma. Minatayre, it is Truma. You have to give a second time only midrabanan because it became sour. So you didn't do the mitzvah properly. Midrabanan, they require you to give a second time. But really, it was already truma the first time. Rabbi Loi, as Rabbi Loi said, Rabbi Loi said, how do I know if a person separates truma and he takes from the worst part of the produce and he gives on the best? So he's using the worst as the truma. Shetruma se truma. The truma takes effect. Shenema, as the pasuk says, v'lo isisu ol of chet. You should not have an aveda when you separate the truma. What is this talking about? This is talking about when a person gives from the worst of what he has for truma, and it says that's an aveda. Now, if the truma that he gave did not take effect at all, it wasn't sanctified, and this is chet lama, there's no aveda here. He just didn't give the truma yet. He has to give the truma. There's no aveda. So mikan, from here Rabbi Loi learned out, l'toidem min hara ala yafe, when you give from the worst of your produce for the best, shetruma say truma, that the truma takes effect. Elamites an aveda that you choose to give to the kohen from the worst of your produce, but it takes effect. So because it takes effect, over there you can't say give back the truma. Over there, the kohen keeps the truma because it is truma. Elamai chachamim instituted that you have to give truma again because you gave from the worst. Whereas when it comes by the challah, the challah that you gave did not take effect at all. So in such a case, you give back the challah, and the kohen doesn't keep it, because if you're going to tell him to give challah a second time, he's not going to listen to us. He's not going to give the challah again.